Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I started this job 3 months ago. I'm the night caretaker in a commercial building downtown. Most floors have offices for lawyers, accountants, and tech startups. During the day, the lobby is busy. At night, it's all mine. I patrol the floors, check the doors, watch the cameras. It pays better than I expected, and I like the quiet. But people always ask me about the 13th floor. They say the building has a locked 13th floor that no one rents. The elevator buttons go from 12 to 14. There's no official acknowledgement of a 13th floor, yet on the paperwork I was given, there's a mention of an empty space on the plans. I assumed it was a design choice or some old superstition. I didn't think about it much at first. On my second week, I heard a noise while I was making my round. It came from above me. I had checked the 12th floor. It was empty, all offices closed. Then I heard something that sounded like a window sliding open. It was loud and echoed through the stairwell. I looked at my watch. It was a little after 2 in the morning, which is usually my most boring time. That noise startled me. I went back to the corridor and waited, trying to figure out where it came from. Then I heard it again, like someone sliding a window open, then shutting it fast. Metal scraping on metal. It gave me goosebumps. I took the flashlight out of my belt and headed to the elevator. I pressed 14. The elevator took me up, but the noise stopped. When I reached the 14th floor, I walked around. Everything was dark, but I checked every window. All locked. No sign of movement. I didn't see anything strange, so I shrugged it off and went back down. That same night, around 3:30, I heard it again. This time it was louder and followed by a bang, like a heavy shutter or panel. I ran to the elevator, ready to check floors 12 and 14 again. But when I stepped inside, the panel where the buttons are usually lit up in an odd way. The lights behind the numbers flickered. For a second, I thought I saw a faint button that said 13. It was there for half a second, then gone. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but there were only the usual numbers. I pressed 14. The elevator rose, but halfway up it felt like it slowed down. It made a weird grinding noise, then continued. On the 14th floor, everything was silent except for the low hum of the hallway lights. I tried the stairwell. I walked down to the 12th floor, shining my flashlight on the walls. Nothing. I felt an odd chill, so I checked the windows in the stairwell. All closed. I walked back to the lobby, a bit uneasy. Over the next few nights, the same noise came back, always around 2 or 3 in the morning. That distinct sliding and slamming of a window or something metallic. I kept trying to locate the source. Each time it felt like it was coming from above. I started to think it had to be on some hidden level, maybe behind some locked door. It didn't make sense because the building's official floors all seemed normal. I asked the day staff if they knew anything about the 13th floor. They laughed or changed the subject. The janitor who works days told me not to bother. He said the building owners never leased that floor and that I should leave it alone. No one ever gave me a direct reason. They just said it was blocked off during construction. One night, about a month into the job, I decided to take the stairs up from the lobby, floor by floor. I figured I'd see if there was some locked access door. The building has a door to the mechanical floors on 15 and 16, but that's for the AC system. Between 12 and 14, there's a narrow landing with a single locked door that has no label. I never noticed it before because it's tucked behind the main stairwell door. It's a dark gray metal door with a heavy chain wrapped around the handle. There's a padlock the size of my fist keeping it shut. I tried the handle. It didn't budge. I listened. Silence. So I went on with my shift. A week later, I heard the noise again, but this time it was followed by footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, like someone walking down a corridor. Then a pause. Then the footsteps would resume. My heart pounded. It was around 2 in the morning again. I took the stairs up to that chained door. This time I stood there longer, pressing my ear against it. I heard a faint creaking noise, like a floorboard under pressure. The chain rattled slightly. I tested the padlock, but it was still secure. My flashlight started flickering. I smacked it with my palm, and the light steadied. Then I felt this weird shift of air, like a breeze through a gap. But the door looked sealed. I stayed a few more seconds. Then the footsteps stopped. Later that night, while I sat in the security office watching the camera feeds, a flicker caught my eye on the hallway camera for the 12th floor. It looked like a light turned on for a moment. I switched to the next camera, but everything was dark again. So I took the elevator up, stepped onto the 12th floor, and walked around. The place smelled stale, like dust and old carpet. Nothing unusual. On my way back to the elevator, I thought I heard something overhead. It was a muffled banging sound, then a scraping. I pressed my hand against the ceiling tile. It felt solid. I got back on the elevator, went to the lobby, and tried to shake it off. 2 weeks went by with the same pattern. Always between 1 and 3 in the morning, I'd hear the sliding noise. Sometimes it was slow and drawn out, sometimes sharp and loud. Once, I heard it 3 times in a row. I felt anxious every night, waiting for it. My stomach would tighten and I'd get sweaty palms around the time I expected the noise. One night, I lost patience and decided to do a thorough search. I started on the 12th floor at around 1:45 a.m. I checked every room. Nothing. Then I moved to the 14th. Same routine. As I walked the hallway, I heard a loud clang from behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight, but there was no one. I waited, listening to my heartbeat in my ears. Another clang, closer, then silence. I was breathing hard. I looked at the windows, tested them, all locked. I checked every door in that hallway. They were locked. I returned to the elevator, but before I pressed the button for the lobby, something clicked inside the elevator shaft. The elevator car didn't come. I pressed the button again. Nothing. So I took the stairwell. On the way down, I noticed the door on the unmarked landing was slightly ajar. The chain hung loose and the padlock lay on the floor. My chest tightened. I couldn't figure out who unlocked it. I picked up the padlock. It wasn't broken. It was open, as if someone had the key. I shined my flashlight into the gap. A dark hallway stretched beyond the door. It smelled stale. I pushed the door open a little more and it creaked. The hallway beyond it looked like a normal corridor at first, but the walls were a dull white, chipped in places. The floor was made of old linoleum tiles. I took a few steps inside, testing each step. My ears were on high alert. No footsteps, no voices. Just an odd, faint hum from somewhere deeper in the hallway. I told myself to turn back, but I kept going. I walked about 20 yards until I reached a corner. The corridor turned left. I looked around it with my flashlight. It kept going, but now there were doors on both sides. Plain, unmarked wooden doors. Some had faint scratches near the bottom, like someone had dragged a sharp object across them. The further I went, the more the air felt stagnant. I tasted dust on my tongue. My throat felt dry. I decided to test one of the doors. It turned out to be unlocked. I pushed it open and my flashlight revealed a small office-like room. Empty except for a single metal desk with nothing on it. The walls had marks that looked like scuffs or smudges. In one corner, I saw what looked like claw marks, 5 parallel lines etched into the plaster about 2 feet long. My stomach turned a bit. I stepped closer. The indentations were deep. I ran my fingertips over them. My skin prickled. I backed away, closed the door, and moved further down the hallway. As I went on, the corridor branched off in more directions. It was like a maze. Some hallways had burnt out ceiling lights, so I relied on my flashlight. More doors, more empty rooms, more scratch marks. In some places, I saw broken glass on the floor. In others, I saw footprints in the dust. They looked human but uneven, like someone was dragging one foot. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I kept going, even though every part of me wanted to leave. I needed to see where this would lead. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Then I heard the noise again, That same window slide sound followed by a loud bang. It came from deeper in the corridor or maybe above me. I picked up my pace, shining the light on each door I passed. Then the lights overhead started flickering. I froze. The flickering made it seem like the hallway was shifting. My head started pounding. I heard a voice, low and distant, calling something. At first I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like a plea, something like help or please. My gut clenched. I called out, "Is anyone here?" My voice sounded small. I got no clear answer, just a faint moan. I pushed forward to another door that had a large scratch on it, almost carving the door in half. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. It turned without resistance. Inside was a larger room, maybe a conference room with a long table in the center. The table was covered in dust and had more scratch marks across its surface. The walls had torn bits of wallpaper. I heard that voice again. It sounded closer. "Let me out," it said. It was weak, drawn out, but clear enough. My heart pounded. I checked under the table. Nothing. I opened a small closet at the back. Empty. The voice came again, from the hallway now. "Let me out." Goosebumps rose on my arms. I followed the sound, stepping back into the corridor. My flashlight caught a flicker at the end of the hall. It looked like a shape moving into another passage. I hurried forward. That stale odor of dust grew stronger. I felt my mouth go dry. The hallway branched again, leading me to an area I didn't recognize. The carpeting changed color from brown to gray. The walls had fewer scuffs here, but the overhead lights were dead, so I relied on my flashlight. Every few seconds I heard that voice, almost like a whisper. "Let me out." Each time it sounded a bit more desperate. I found another door that looked different. This one was reinforced with a steel frame. It was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness inside. I listened at the gap. Silence. I pushed it open with my foot, keeping my flashlight up. The smell inside was pungent, like damp paper and mildew. Stacks of old boxes filled the corners. The floor was sticky in places. I swept the beam around the room. More claw marks on the walls. A few broken wooden chairs piled against a corner. As I took a step inside, something behind me scraped against the floor. I spun around, shining the flashlight. Nobody was there, but the door had moved slightly, as if nudged from the outside. I swallowed hard. I felt my heart hammering. My thoughts raced. I wanted to call for backup, but who would I call? The building security code says I'm the only caretaker on duty. I inched back into the corridor. My flashlight started flickering again. A low hum filled my ears. It felt like pressure building behind my eyes. The voice came once more, almost in my ear, though no one was there. "Let me out," it said, louder this time. I nearly dropped my flashlight. I forced myself to stay calm. The corridor ahead was darker than before, as if the lights had shut off completely. I could see a faint glow coming from around the next corner, a greenish hue like an emergency light. I took slow steps, ignoring the sweat dripping down my forehead. My pulse throbbed in my temples. When I reached that corner, I noticed a window at the end of the hallway. It was a large window with a rusted metal frame. It was closed and locked, yet I heard that same sliding sound right as I approached it. I watched the window rattle, even though there was no wind. I reached out to touch it. The glass felt ice cold. Suddenly it slid up on its own, then slammed shut with a bang. I stumbled back, gasping for air. My throat felt tight. The voice said, "Let me out," again, but I couldn't tell if it came from behind the window or deeper in the corridor. My skin crawled. I looked behind me. The hallway stretched back in a way I couldn't recognize. It looked longer than before, with more doors. I felt trapped in that place. A wave of dizziness hit me. My mind was screaming to leave. I turned around and ran back the way I thought I came. My flashlight beam jumped across the walls, revealing more scratches, some forming deep gouges. My footsteps echoed, and the corridor seemed to curve. I kept going, turning corners, trying to retrace my path. Each time I ended up in a similar hallway with the same scuffed walls. My eyes teared up with panic. I couldn't find the stairwell door. I could feel my chest tighten. My legs shook. Finally, I spotted the chain and padlock on the floor again. It was near that original metal door. The door was wide open. I lunged for it, tripping on my own feet, nearly slamming into the doorframe. I glanced back into the darkness of that corridor. I couldn't see anything moving, but I felt a presence, like something watching me from the gloom. My entire body was tense. I scooped up the padlock, dashed through the doorway, and pulled the door shut behind me with all my strength. It creaked, but closed. I wrapped the chain around the handle, fumbling with the padlock until it clicked. My hands were trembling so badly that it took me a few tries. When it finally locked, I let out a shaky breath and hurried down the stairs. Once I reached the lobby, I went straight to my security desk and sat down. My head pounded. My face was slick with sweat. I tried to get my breathing under control. I stared at the monitors, but all I saw were empty hallways and dark offices. Normal floors with normal closed doors. The phone sat on the desk. I thought about calling the building manager or maybe the police. But what would I say? There was no crime. There were just impossible rooms and weird noises. My hands kept shaking, so I grabbed a bottle of water from the mini fridge and gulped it down. I took a few deep breaths and tried to steady myself. I decided not to mention it to anyone the next morning. I stayed until my shift ended at 6. I walked outside, saw the sunrise, and felt a rush of relief. Since then, I still hear the window noises at night. Sometimes they're mild, sometimes they're loud. I pretend I don't hear them. I check the floors I can access, but I avoid that unmarked door. I still see the chain and lock in place, but every time I pass by, I feel like something on the other side is listening for my steps. Sometimes I hear faint tapping from behind it, like nails on metal. The building manager never mentions anything. No one complains about the 13th floor. No one wants to talk about it. I don't know who or what is in there. I don't know if it's a person or something else. All I know is that I hear it every night, opening and closing a window that shouldn't be there. I hear footsteps on floors that shouldn't exist. And once in a while, I hear a voice that begs to be let out. I do my rounds, I collect my paycheck, and I try not to think about it. I feel uneasy every time the clock hits 2 in the morning. I brace myself, wait for the familiar sound of metal sliding against metal, and hope that door stays locked. I can't erase those scratches from my memory. They felt too real. I felt the grooves under my fingertips. I can't forget how the hallway seemed to stretch forever like a trap. That's the story of the 13th floor in this building. That's my reality now. I'm the night caretaker, and I stick to the floors I know. I stay away from that door. I handle my duties and try to ignore the noises. I don't know if it'll ever stop, but I'm not going back in there alone, no matter what I hear. If I'm honest, I'm not sure I'd come out again if I did. So I keep my head down, do my job, and hope that whatever's in there stays locked away. I don't have a better plan. I just know I won't open that door again. I arrived at the house around midday, hoping to find a quiet space to relax. I had rented it online after reading that it was a big old place in a historic district. The stone walls looked sturdy from the outside. The front steps were worn, and the door hinges felt a bit loose when I unlocked it. The inside smelled like old wood and a faint trace of something damp. The hallway was narrow, with scuffed floorboards that made a dull creak under my shoes. I set my bags down in the living room, which was sparsely furnished with a couch, a small table, and a single lamp. There was a silence that seemed peaceful at first. I walked through the rooms to check everything. The kitchen had an older refrigerator and a narrow window that looked out onto a patch of uncut grass. The walls were a grayish-white color, chipped in spots near the corners. A few cabinets squeaked when I opened them. They were half empty, except for a few plates and cups. The hallway led to a short set of stairs. At the top, there were 3 rooms: a bedroom, a spare room, and a bathroom. The bedroom had a large bed with plain sheets and a wooden dresser along one wall. The air felt stale, like the room hadn't been used in a while. After settling in, I noticed a door in the hallway ceiling. It was a pull-down ladder to the attic. I tested the cord, but it seemed stuck, so I left it alone. I figured I might take a look up there later once I got settled. I spent most of the afternoon unpacking my clothes and storing my food in the kitchen. The day was uneventful. I walked around the house, checking the windows and flipping on the lights to see if everything worked. The overhead bulbs flickered, but they held steady after a few seconds. As evening came, I sat in the living room trying to read a book. The lamp was dim, and the quiet felt heavier. I shrugged it off at first. Old houses sometimes creak, and the wind can slip through cracks in the walls. Around 8, I started hearing a faint noise. It sounded like a low murmur, almost like water rushing through pipes, but then it shifted into something softer, like hushed voices. It stopped whenever I stood still and tried to pinpoint it. I turned off the lamp to see if the sound came from outside, but I heard nothing else. After a few minutes, I tried to ignore it and went upstairs to wash my face and get ready for bed. I turned on the bathroom light and caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. My hair looked a bit messy from the car ride, and my eyes felt tired. I rinsed my face. When I looked up again, there was some steam on the glass, forming what looked like blurred letters. I leaned closer, but the letters vanished. It might have been my breath or some leftover moisture in the room. I dried my face and went to the bedroom. That first night, I didn't sleep well. Around midnight, the whispers started again. They were distant, like people talking in the next room, but I knew there was nobody else here. My heart rate picked up, and I stayed completely still in bed. The air felt cold on my arms. The voices grew more intense, but I couldn't pick out words. It sounded like multiple people talking at once, each voice overlapping the other. I thought about getting up and turning on the lights, but I was too uneasy to move. After a few minutes, the whispers faded. I stayed awake, listening for them, until I eventually drifted off. In the morning, I felt groggy and stiff. I went downstairs to make some coffee. The steps creaked in a way I hadn't noticed before, like the wood was protesting. I opened the kitchen blinds. The day outside looked clear, and the sun made the grass look less dreary. I drank my coffee at the small table, trying to shake off the lingering feeling from the night before. I decided to check out the attic. I grabbed the cord for the pull-down ladder, and this time it came free. The ladder unfolded with a screech. A musty smell washed over me. I climbed up slowly. The attic was cramped, with a single bulb hanging from the rafters. Boxes lined the sides, covered in dust. I saw a small wooden trunk in the corner. It had rusted metal latches, but it wasn't locked. I opened it and found a stack of old letters tied together with a piece of frayed string. Each envelope was yellowed, and the handwriting varied. Some letters looked more recent than others. I skimmed the first one. It was dated around 20 years ago. It mentioned strange noises in the house late at night, coming from the walls. The writer sounded unnerved, describing how they felt watched in the corridors. Another letter was from a different person, talking about hearing faint cries when they were alone. One mentioned that they kept seeing blurred messages on the bathroom mirror. I read a few more and found references to old residents who had supposedly disappeared. The letters suggested these people were still here in some form, trapped in what one writer called echoes of the past. That phrase was repeated in multiple letters, almost like a warning. I felt a chill on my neck as I read. My stomach tightened and my breath got heavier. It was one thing to hear a few strange noises in an old house, but these letters sounded too familiar. They matched my experience from the night before. I told myself it might be some local folklore. Maybe people like to exaggerate. Still, my hands trembled as I put the letters back. I spent the rest of the morning trying to distract myself. I went outside for a short walk, looking at the old buildings on the street. A few neighbors passed by, but they just nodded politely. I considered asking them about the house, but I felt awkward. I didn't want to seem paranoid. When I returned, the house felt colder than before. I turned up the thermostat and sat on the couch, flipping through a local guidebook. My mind kept drifting back to those letters. Night came again. I made a quick dinner in the kitchen, but I had no appetite. I kept glancing at the walls, half expecting to hear something. By 9 o'clock, the whispers began. They were louder than the previous night. My heart pounded and my throat felt dry. I walked to the living room wall and pressed my ear against it. I heard a muffled voice. It sounded like a man's voice, but I couldn't make out the words. I checked the other side of the wall. It was the exterior of the house, so there was no other room there. I felt a jolt of fear in my chest. The voice continued for a few more seconds, then went silent. I turned on all the lights downstairs. The brightness made me feel a little less tense. I considered leaving, but I had paid for the rental, and I also felt a strange curiosity. The letters mentioned an old pact. I wondered if it had something to do with the voices. I made a plan to check the attic again the next day to see if there were any other clues. For now, I decided to stay awake longer. Around 11, I sat in the living room with the lamp on. The front door was locked and all the windows were shut. The whispers started again, this time from the ceiling. I heard a soft scraping noise, followed by a slow creaking, like someone was walking around up there. My skin prickled and my pulse raced. I stood up, but my legs felt weak. I called out, "Hello?" But I got no response. The noises stopped. I wondered if I should go up to the attic right then, but I felt my nerves shaking. I chose to wait until daylight. I went upstairs to the bedroom. I left the hallway light on this time. My reflection in the bathroom mirror still bothered me, so I avoided looking into it. I lay down on the bed, fully dressed, and tried to keep my eyes open. I caught myself nodding off. At some point in the early morning hours, I slipped into a restless sleep. I dreamed of faint figures standing in the hallway, whispering to each other, but I couldn't see their faces. When the morning light came through the window, I woke up with a stiff neck. My mouth felt dry and I had a mild headache. I went to the bathroom. The mirror was fogged up a bit. I saw smears that looked like smudged letters. They might have spelled something, but it was too blurred to read clearly. I wiped the mirror with my hand and the smears disappeared. I felt a rush of anxiety in my chest, but I kept telling myself it was just condensation or something random. I went back to the attic. The air felt heavier up there, as if it hadn't been ventilated in decades. I opened a few more boxes and found old journals. They all had similar stories, odd sights, voices in empty rooms, and messages appearing in mirrors. One journal mentioned an ancient pact made by some of the original occupants. It didn't specify what the pact was, only that it was supposed to keep them together in spirit if they ever left the physical world. The words sounded strange, but there were no details about how it worked or why they would do something like that. I noticed the last entry in one journal mentioned hearing voices call the writer's name when they were alone. I felt a jolt because I hadn't heard anything call my name yet, but I dreaded the thought. I decided to step away from the attic. My hands felt clammy, and my breathing quickened. I put the journals down and climbed back downstairs. The house felt dead silent again, which made me nervous. That silence felt unnatural, almost like something was waiting. In the afternoon, I tried to keep busy by cleaning some of the rooms. I wiped down the kitchen counters, vacuumed the living room rug, and washed a few dishes. The normal activity helped me stay grounded for a while. I listened for any odd noises, but it stayed quiet. Around 4, I noticed the hallway light flickered a bit. I replaced the bulb, but it kept giving off a weak flicker now and then, like the wiring was old. When night fell, I felt my pulse picking up again. I sat on the couch, leaving the overhead light on. The house stayed silent until about 10 o'clock. Then the murmurs started. I heard what sounded like a crowd whispering in the distance. My ears buzzed with tension, and my stomach twisted. I tried to calm myself by breathing slowly. The voices grew louder, then seemed to circle around me. I heard them shifting from one wall to the next. The temperature felt cooler, and I shivered. I stood up and walked toward the stairs. The voice near the living room wall grew clearer. I heard a phrase that sounded like, "We can't leave." My heart pounded. My throat tightened. I felt tears welling up because the tension was so intense. I wanted to open the front door and run, but my mind told me to hold on. I reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. A new set of whispers started near the top floor, like they were right above me. I placed my foot on the first step and a heavy sense of dread filled my chest. I forced myself up the stairs one step at a time. My body felt shaky, and my palms were sweaty. I flicked on the hallway light. The door to the bathroom was half open. I heard a slight rustling inside. I reached out and pushed the door open. The mirror was covered in steam, even though I hadn't used hot water. I saw faint marks on the glass. My breath came in short bursts. I leaned in closer, and the marks looked like they formed the words, "Don't break it." I blinked and stepped back. I didn't know what it meant. My hands were trembling. I left the bathroom and stood in the hallway trying to slow my breathing. A floorboard creaked behind me, but I saw nobody there. I turned on the light in the bedroom and stood at the threshold. The curtains fluttered slightly, even though the window was closed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The voices sounded closer, but they were disjointed, like they were coming from different directions at once. My mind raced with thoughts of the letters and the old journal entries. They said the old residents were stuck. They said the voices kept repeating the same warnings. Now I was hearing them too. I went back downstairs, turned on every light I could find, and sat in the living room. The whispers continued for a while, then subsided around midnight. My body felt weak from the adrenaline. I stayed on the couch with the lights on until dawn. I couldn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint murmurs or felt like something was moving in the next room. When morning finally arrived, I made some coffee and took a long look around the house. My nerves were shot and I felt drained. I decided I couldn't stay there another night. The letters all talked about how these voices kept going, how they never stopped. I believed it now. Whatever energy was in this house, it wasn't going to let me have a normal vacation. It fed on isolation and quiet moments. It wanted me to listen to those echoes, to see those messages. I packed my things as fast as I could, shoving clothes and toiletries into my suitcase. My stomach churned and I could feel sweat gathering under my arms. I double-checked the trunk in the attic and put all the letters back. I didn't want to take anything from that place, not even a piece of paper. I left the attic as I found it and climbed down, making sure the door was firmly shut. On my way out, I paused in the living room. I listened for a moment. The house was silent, but that silence felt thick with possibilities. My heart hammered, half expecting to hear one last whisper. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The fresh air felt like a release. I locked the door behind me and walked to my car. My hands were still shaking as I started the engine. I didn't look back at the house. I left, feeling a mix of relief and leftover anxiety that clung to my chest. I never learned the full story of the missing residents or how that strange pact came about. I didn't want to dig any deeper. All I knew was that the whispers were real, and they were persistent. I drove away from that historic district, and I didn't stop until I was well past the city limits. I can still picture that bathroom mirror with the blurry letters, and I can still feel the press of those whispers. I don't plan on telling anyone else about this experience in detail, because I doubt they'd believe me. But I know what happened, and I know I'll never set foot in that house again. I never cared much about old stuff until I inherited this mirror from my grandfather. He was a sailor who sailed around the Cape of Good Hope more times than I can count. He passed it down to me without much explanation. When I first hung it in the hallway outside my bedroom, I thought it was just an antique. I didn't know it came from some remote coastal village where people believed strange spirits lived inside reflective surfaces. I shrugged off those stories at first. Now I'm not so sure. Something is off about this mirror and I can't ignore it anymore. I noticed the first odd thing about a week after I hung it. The hallway is narrow, and I don't spend much time in that space unless I'm walking to my bedroom or the bathroom. One night I was heading to the bathroom around 3 a.m. I was groggy but awake enough to notice something weird. I glanced at the mirror, and I saw my reflection standing too still. I kept walking, but the reflection seemed to pause for a split second longer than me. It was like it lagged behind. It happened so quickly that I almost thought I imagined it. I remember my heart pounding. My chest felt tight. I stared at the mirror again, but it looked normal a moment later. I told myself I was just tired and half dreaming. The next night, I tried to watch the reflection carefully when I walked past, but everything seemed fine. Then a few nights later, around the same time, I saw it again. My reflection looked like it was half a step behind me. I felt my skin go cold. My back stiffened, and I got that sensation in my neck, like someone was breathing down it. There wasn't anyone else in the house, but I checked over my shoulder anyway. Empty hallway. The reflection went back to normal as soon as I turned to face the mirror directly. Over the next few days, I tried not to obsess about it. I worked from home at the time, so it was easy to get stuck in my own head. I spent the daytime sitting at my desk, focusing on my computer. I tried to avoid walking by the mirror, but it was impossible unless I wanted to rearrange my entire apartment. By the third or fourth day, I realized I had to do something. I thought about taking it down, but it was my grandfather's piece. He prized it enough to keep it for decades, so I hesitated. Instead, I did some research online about old mirrors. I found stories about haunted antiques, but they all sounded fake. Still, the idea of a mirror having some kind of weird energy started to burrow into my mind. I called my aunt. She's the only other person who knew my grandfather well. She said he bought the mirror in a small fishing village a long time ago. She didn't remember the name of the village, but she said it was somewhere along a rugged coast. She also mentioned he got it after his second or third time passing the Cape of Good Hope. She said locals in that area had a legend about sea spirits getting trapped in glass. My aunt laughed it off, though, so I didn't push it. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking about what my aunt said. I had never believed in ghosts or spirits, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that mirror was different. Around 1 a.m, I got up for a glass of water. My bedroom door opens onto the hallway, so the mirror is right across from me. I looked at it as soon as I stepped out. My reflection was normal. I exhaled and tried to relax, but then I heard something. It sounded like water sloshing against a boat or maybe waves on a shore. It was faint, but it came from the direction of the mirror. I walked closer until I stood right in front of it. My reflection stared back at me. I listened. My pulse thumped in my ears, but under that I heard the distant sound of the ocean. It was faint but clear enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. I didn't move for about a minute, just listening. Then the sound faded. I suddenly felt like I was being watched. The hair on my arms stood up. I turned around, scanning the hallway. Nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, the reflection was perfectly normal. I felt my jaw clenching. My breathing was short and quick. I finally forced myself to walk to the kitchen. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I woke up with a headache. My eyes were sore, probably from lack of rest. I decided to look deeper into the place where my grandfather got the mirror. It took me hours of searching random keywords online. Eventually, I found a reference to an old legend from a remote fishing village. It mentioned how fishermen believed that spirits of drowned sailors or sea creatures could latch onto reflective surfaces. I read about how travelers sometimes bought mirrors or small glass trinkets, not realizing they carried something with them. The villagers claimed these spirits would follow the owners home looking for a way to return to the sea. It was all anecdotal, but the details made my stomach churn. The story talked about hearing waves at night and feeling a damp presence around the object. That night, I noticed a thin crust of salt near the edges of the mirror's frame. It wasn't obvious at first. I only saw it because I turned on the brighter overhead light in the hallway. It looked like a whitish residue that you might see on a window if sea spray had dried there. I touched it. It felt gritty. I sniffed my fingers, and they smelled like salt. I live nowhere near the ocean, and I don't have any reason for salt to appear in my hallway. I also spotted a bit of greenish slime near the top corner. It reminded me of the algae I've seen on pier posts. My throat went dry. My hands trembled a bit. I wiped the residue off with a cloth, then threw the cloth in the trash. I felt unsettled and didn't know what to do. I spent the next few hours pacing around my living room. My heart kept pounding like I was about to face some unknown threat. Around midnight, I heard a low creaking sound from the hallway. It was like someone pressed lightly against the floorboards. I walked over slowly and saw the mirror. The surface looked darker than usual, even though the overhead light was on. I stepped closer, and I swear it felt like stepping onto a wet dock. The air around the mirror felt damp. I reached out to touch the frame, and a cold, slick residue coated the wood. I pulled my hand back in shock. My breathing got rough. My chest tightened. I checked my fingers again, and I saw what looked like wet algae. I wiped it on my pants, not sure what else to do. That was the moment I decided I had to confront this. I figured I needed to do more research about the village. I found a phone number for a local historian who specialized in maritime folklore. I called him the next day. We spoke briefly, and I mentioned the mirror. I told him about the salt, the algae, and the out-of-sync reflection. He got quiet, then told me about a legend regarding a creature from the depths that got trapped in a mirror centuries ago. According to him, the spirit tries to escape by merging with whoever looks into it. He didn't say it would kill me or anything like that. He said it might just want to get free. But he warned me that these stories usually end with the spirit taking on the form of the mirror's owner. He suggested I get rid of the mirror immediately. I hung up the phone and sat there, my legs shaking. I felt a rush of heat in my face. My palms were sweating. I decided I would remove the mirror from the wall and store it somewhere else. I walked into the hallway, reached up to unhook it, and the moment I touched it, I felt a sharp chill race through my arm. I dropped the mirror. It thudded against the wall, then fell to the floor. Amazingly, it didn't crack. I picked it up more carefully and carried it into a small storage closet near the back of the apartment. I set it against the wall, face toward the corner. Then I closed the door. I felt some relief. The hallway felt lighter. I thought that was the end of it. That night, I heard the ocean sounds again. This time, they were louder, almost echoing in my living room. I walked around checking windows, thinking there might be a busted pipe or some weird neighbor's TV. Nothing. I realized the sound was coming from the storage closet. I stood outside the door, listening to the steady whoosh and crash. My hands shook. I pressed my ear to the wood. It felt colder than the rest of the wall. My breath felt shallow, and my heart pounded. I stepped back, worried about what I'd see if I opened it. I decided to open it anyway. I had to know. I swung the door open, turned on the closet light, and stared at the mirror. There was a faint glow on its surface, like moonlight reflecting on dark water. The sound of waves was clearer. I tasted salt in the air. I felt a damp breeze, even though there's no ventilation in there. For a second, I thought I saw movement inside the mirror, like a ripple. I froze. My body felt locked in place, but my mind was screaming at me to move. Then the glow faded. The closet went quiet. The mirror looked like any normal mirror again, except for a bit of salt crust at the bottom. I grabbed a towel and wiped off the salt. My fingers trembled the entire time. Then I closed the door again, walked to the kitchen, and made coffee even though it was almost midnight. I stayed up in the living room with every light on. My mind raced with questions. I kept thinking of my grandfather. Why did he keep this thing for so long? Had he dealt with the same problem? I wanted to throw the mirror out into the alley, but something stopped me. Maybe it was guilt over trashing something he left me. Maybe it was fear that just dumping it wouldn't fix the situation. Over the next few days, I noticed new patches of salt forming on the mirror's edges. Whenever I checked on it, I wiped them off. Each time I sensed that ocean smell growing stronger. My reflection started doing that lagging thing more often whenever I dared to peek at the mirror. It was unnerving. My mouth went dry each time. My gut twisted. I started feeling a sense of dread every time night came. I looked into more stories about that village. I found a reference to a ritual some fishermen performed to release a spirit back into the water. It mentioned something about submerging the mirror in seawater at midnight, but I live too far from the coast. I'm not even sure it would help. The historian I spoke to told me it might be risky to interact with the mirror too closely. He said if the spirit attaches itself to me, I might experience more intense phenomena, like seeing shapes in the reflection or hearing voices. I already felt like I was hearing faint whispers late at night, so that advice came too late. A few nights ago, I tried to record the sounds. I set up my phone in the hallway with a voice recorder app running. Around 2 in the morning, I listened back. Sure enough, I caught what sounded like a distant tide. I felt a chill run through me. The next day, I found algae and thin streaks along the hallway floor leading from the closet to the bathroom. It was like something had dragged seaweed across my apartment. The smell was strong. It reminded me of rotting kelp on a dock. I've started to see something in the reflection when I open the closet. It's like a shape behind me, tall and dark, with a slick texture. It never fully forms. It appears for half a second and I jolt away. My stomach tightens. My heart races so fast I can feel it in my ears. I try to calm myself, but it happens almost every time I look now. The shape doesn't match anything in the room. It's not me, and it's not a shadow of any object in the closet. I've been thinking about taking the mirror to a local lake. It's not saltwater, but maybe it's enough. Part of me wants to smash it, but I don't know if that would release whatever is inside or if it would trap it here. I keep going back and forth in my head. Each night, the sounds of waves get louder. The salt patches get bigger. The algae grows back faster. I'm barely sleeping. My eyes burn most of the day. I've taken to walking around the apartment with a bat. Not that I think I can fight a spirit with a bat. It just makes me feel less helpless. Right now, I'm sitting on my couch with all the lights on, typing this out. I can hear the faint slosh of water against something, and I'm sure it's coming from the closet. I keep glancing at the hallway, half expecting the door to open on its own. My breathing is shallow. My palms are damp. My whole body feels tense. My grandfather's old mirror is in there, probably covered in more salt and algae by now. I don't know what's going to happen if I leave it there. But if I take it out, I feel like I'm inviting whatever is inside to come closer. I have no clue how this ends. All I know is that the reflection isn't always matching my movements anymore. Sometimes I see a flicker of something else in there, something with dark skin and sharp ridges. I notice the flicker, then it's gone. I keep rubbing my eyes, thinking I might be hallucinating. But when I step into the hallway and approach the closet, the floor feels slightly wet. My feet leave prints on the way back. I don't know if I can handle this much longer, but I also can't just forget about it. I plan to call that historian again tomorrow. Maybe he'll have some practical advice on how to handle this mirror. I'm not going to the ocean anytime soon, but maybe there's another way. I just hope I can sleep tonight without hearing those waves crash behind the closet door. If it gets worse, I might have to do something drastic like burying the mirror somewhere. I'm not sure that would solve the problem. Right now, I just want this presence gone. I can't live with the feeling that something is watching me every time I pass that hallway. That's the story so far. It's all I can tell you. The old mirror my grandfather left me seems to hold the spirit of something lost at sea. It's creeping into my reflection, leaving salt and algae around my apartment, and making me hear waves at night. I'm stuck with this thing until I figure out a way to send it back where it came from, or at least get it out of my life. But I'm afraid of what might happen if I push it too far. I'm afraid that whatever's in there is waiting for me to slip up, to look too long, to let my guard down. I don't know how this ends, but I know I can't ignore it anymore. The mirror is here, and it's not going away on its own. I saw something that shouldn't have been there. That's how everything started. One early morning, on a day that felt like any other, I sat by the train window, staring at the passing buildings. I was tired, and I didn't care about much besides closing my eyes for a few minutes. Then I noticed a face in the reflection on the glass. It wasn't my face. It looked like an older man's face, but the details were blurry. At first, I rubbed my eyes and blinked a few times. The face stayed there, staring back at me, but when I turned my head to check behind me, no one was there. I felt a chill move through my arms. I told myself it was just some weird reflection or maybe a smudge on the window. I forced myself to ignore it. The next day, I took the same seat. I had a habit of sitting in the same spot, usually a corner seat by the window. I got comfortable, put my bag on my lap, and looked out at the city. After a couple of stops, I glanced at the window. I felt my heart jump because that face was there again. This time it looked sharper. I could see the forehead, the eyes, and the outline of a mouth. My breath caught in my throat. I tilted my head, thinking maybe my reflection was blending with something behind me. But I was alone in that section of the car. There was no one across from me or behind me. When I looked at the face again, its mouth twitched. I swear I saw a small, strange grin. A shiver crept up my back. I changed seats. For a few days after that, I tried different cars. Sometimes I sat near the doors. Sometimes I stood. Sometimes I took an entirely different train, one that left 15 minutes earlier. But every single time, usually once we passed the second or third stop, I spotted that face in the window if I looked at my reflection. If there were other people around, they didn't seem to notice anything. Nobody said a word about it. I started to feel uneasy, but I told myself it was just a trick of the mind. Then I noticed it moving. It happened one morning when the train was almost empty. I leaned forward, trying to tie my shoe. When I looked up at the window, the face was there, but the eyes looked like they were shifting around. I felt my stomach tighten. I looked away and pressed my fingertips against my temples. My breath got faster. I counted to 10, then forced myself to look back. The face still stared at me, but now the mouth seemed curved in a slight smirk. I couldn't stand it. I stood up and walked down the aisle to the door, holding onto the rail. The train rattled, and my legs felt weak. I felt sweat on my neck. I waited for the next stop and got off without even thinking. I ended up being late to work, but I didn't care. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept remembering that face in the window, and every time I closed my eyes, I felt like it was there in my room. I kept turning on the bedside lamp, checking my mirror, checking the reflection in my TV screen. There was nothing there, but I felt uneasy. I got up and made some coffee. I stared at my kitchen window, half expecting to see that face staring at me again. Nothing happened, but I stayed up almost the whole night, unable to relax. In the morning, I dreaded going back on that train. I needed to get to work, so I forced myself to go. I avoided looking at any windows. I stared at my phone or I stared at the floor, but out of the corner of my eye, I sensed movement in the glass. I knew if I looked, I'd see it. So I kept my eyes down until my stop came. I got off the train in a rush, almost bumping into an older passenger who was standing near the door. My heart pounded the whole way to work. After a few more days of this, I decided I had to figure out what was going on. I asked a few people on the train platform if they'd ever noticed anything strange on the route. Most shrugged and said no. One guy told me that some local rumor mentioned weird sightings in old train cars that were left on a sidetrack. I pressed him for more details, but he didn't know much. He just said a few people claimed to see shapes in the windows of those abandoned cars, especially late at night. He gave me a website link where local train enthusiasts posted stories about the railway's history. I thanked him and then left, my mind buzzing. When I got home that evening, I looked up the website. It had forum threads about old train stations, lost railway lines, and abandoned cars. A few people claimed to have seen a spirit or ghostly presence near certain abandoned cars. They posted grainy photos. I didn't see any clear faces in those photos, but some angles looked eerie. One post said that a spirit seemed to travel between cars, not confined to one spot. Another said they saw it in reflections, but it never appeared as a solid figure in front of them. My nerves grew tight. I felt my forehead sweating as I read these posts. I spent hours scrolling, reading every piece of information. A few people wrote about nightmares, about feeling watched on empty trains. Some mentioned hearing faint whispers or breathing. I hadn't heard any voices, but the reflection was enough. I posted a message asking if anyone had seen a face in the window while riding a regular passenger train during early morning commutes. Most replies just joked around or called me paranoid, but one person said they saw something similar and recommended that I stop riding that line for a while. They believed the entity could attach itself to specific people. I wasn't sure if that was ridiculous or if I should believe it. I felt a sinking dread in my chest. The next day, I tried to drive to work, but my car wouldn't start. That had never happened before. I ended up calling a friend, but he couldn't give me a ride that day. I had no choice but to take the train. I sat in a different part of the car again, trying to keep my head down. Everything was quiet until we reached that same stretch near the tracks where they kept some older, unused cars. The train slowed a bit and the lights flickered. I glanced at the window in front of me, and there it was. That face. I clenched my fists and my pulse raced. I felt my jaw tighten. I couldn't breathe normally. It looked more defined than ever, like it was pushing against the window from the inside of the reflection. I could see the eyes shifting around, looking left and right as though checking if anyone else was watching. Then it locked eyes with me. My stomach felt hollow. I thought I was going to throw up, so I looked away and shut my eyes until we pulled into the next station. Over the next few days, I started having nightmares. In these dreams, I would walk into an empty train car late at night. The lights above me would flicker and I'd look at the window. That face would be there, sometimes smiling wide, sometimes pressing up against the glass from the other side. I'd try to scream, but no sound came out. Then I'd wake up sweaty, gasping for air. I started leaving my bedroom light on. My hands shook whenever I unlocked my door in the morning. My appetite shrank. I lost weight. My coworkers asked if I was sick. I told them I wasn't sleeping well. They offered me some advice. Go see a doctor, try some medication. But I knew none of that would help if I couldn't get rid of this horrible presence. One Saturday, I decided to visit the abandoned train yard myself. I drove there in the late afternoon. The sky was overcast and the place looked deserted. Several old train cars sat on rusted tracks covered in graffiti. I walked around, feeling my palms sweat. I forced myself to look in the windows of those old cars. Most of them were filled with junk, broken seats, scattered trash. The air smelled like rust and stale water. I didn't see anything unusual at first. Then, as I stood near one of the cars, I heard a faint scraping sound from inside. I tried to peer in through a cracked window. My heart pounded so hard I felt a throb in my neck. The inside was dark, but I could make out a shape in the corner. It was too dark to see details, so I stepped back and found the side door. It was partially open. I pulled it and it creaked. I climbed in, shining a small flashlight I'd brought. The seats were torn, and there was debris on the floor. The scraping sound came again, from somewhere near the opposite end of the car. I moved forward, trying not to make noise. I heard my own breathing echo in that silent space. Suddenly, I heard a louder thump. I pointed the flashlight at the window, and I saw a shape in the glass. It moved quickly, slipping out of view. My chest felt tight. I dropped the flashlight for a second, cursing under my breath as it clattered on the floor. I picked it up, aimed it everywhere. Nothing was there. The car was empty, but I felt a presence. It was like something was behind me, breathing softly against my neck. I spun around, shining the light behind me. Still nothing. Then I heard another scraping sound behind the next row of seats. I backed away, stumbling out of the car. I slammed the door shut and stood outside, panting. That night, the nightmares got worse. I dreamed that face was all around me, in every reflective surface. My bathroom mirror, my phone screen, even the reflection in a dark puddle on the street. When I woke up, I felt exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all. I went to wash my face in the sink, and when I looked at the water in the basin, I thought I saw that grin again. I jumped back, almost tripping. My legs were weak. I tried to avoid windows as much as possible. I stopped looking at reflections in store windows or car mirrors. I avoided eye contact with any reflective surface in the subway. Yet it felt like the face was always there, waiting for me to glance at it. One morning I tried an earlier train, hoping maybe the spirit or whatever it was wouldn't show up. At first everything seemed normal. The car was almost empty, and I stared at my shoes the entire time. But then I felt a shift in the air. The hair on my arms stood up, and I heard a strange click behind me. I looked up at the window for just a second, and it was there, looking more solid. with deep-set eyes and a faint grin. I jumped out of my seat and walked toward the doors. My heart thudded, and I felt sweat dripping from my temples. The train reached the next station and I got off. I stood on the platform, breathing hard. I noticed a security guard. I almost told him what was happening, but I realized I had no way to explain this. I started reading more about protective practices. I read about how some people tried to ward off strange entities by ignoring them, by not giving them energy. So I tried that approach. I stopped reacting even when I saw the face in the window. I forced myself to breathe slowly and stare past it. I told myself it was nothing. My hands still shook and my stomach churned, but I kept this up for a few days. I didn't look away, and I didn't run off the train. The face still appeared, though. Sometimes it got so close to my reflection that it looked like it was inches away from me. But I kept my posture firm and tried to block out the fear. One evening, when I was the only passenger in that section of the train, the face appeared again. The train lights flickered, and I heard a soft scratching sound on the window next to my seat. I forced myself to stay still. My mouth felt dry. My pulse hammered in my ears. The face's expression changed. It wasn't exactly a grin this time. It was something else, like a silent challenge. My legs tensed up, ready to run, but I didn't move. The face slowly drifted along the window, almost as if it was gliding. I swallowed hard and my throat felt scratchy. The train pulled into the final stop, and the face faded away from the glass. I stood up on shaky legs and left the car. I still see the face from time to time, usually on that same stretch of track. It's become a part of my daily routine, even though it scares me. Sometimes I notice it in the reflection of glass doors at the station. Sometimes I see it in the side window when I'm walking along the platform at night. I don't have an explanation for it. I've read all sorts of theories, but nothing really fits. I tried talking to a few more people, but most people think I'm exaggerating or just tired. A couple of them hinted that they've felt something odd on that line, but no one describes it the way I do. I don't know if I'm stuck with this forever. I haven't found a solution. I keep my head